President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, the Senate today has the opportunity to live up to its best traditions. We can put our democracy over any political party. Later today, we'll take the first step that could put us on the path to having an open debate about the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I have championed and sponsored this bill to restore the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965. I've done this for years. Today, senators of both parties have the chance to show they're willing to do the job we were elected to do, to debate and vote on legislation. And no legislation could be more foundational to our democracy than that which protects the right to vote. We 100 senators all have the right to vote. Let us exercise that right and not avoid voting on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. This is such a fundamental part of our democracy. Let's set the example here where all 100 of us know we have the right to vote. Let's make sure we vote and not avoid voting. I hope that we as a Senate will honor the rich bipartisan history around the Voting Rights Act in the name of our hero, John Lewis, in the name of our democracy, in the name of a foundational value that's the bedrock of our country. Just yesterday, we announced a bipartisan compromise in the hopes of building support for the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And I'm grateful to Senators Murkowski and Durbin and Manchin for their dedication to reaching this compromise. That bill, which we would seek to advance after proceeding to S4, will fully restore the Voting Rights Act, which is needed after two devastating decisions by the Supreme Court. I've been clear that should the Senate eventually proceed to this bill, then I'd welcome amendments to further strengthen, solidify this restoration of the Voting Rights Act, which after all has been bipartisan since the first enactment, usually passing the Senate unanimously, being signed into law by Presidents Reagan and Bush and others. But we should at least have that debate. Certainly, senators should not avoid debating. And certainly, senators should not hide behind some procedural rule so that they don't have to vote one way or the other on the basic rights of Americans to vote. So that's why we're here, to debate, vote on bills. There is simply no reason for any senator to look at their constituents and say that this topic, that of protecting the right to vote, is just too political or too controversial. Not the Voting Rights Act, not a voting rights bill that has a 56-year history of bipartisanship. No senator should act as though they are afraid to vote one way or the other on this. Is that the message we want to convey to American voters eager to know what the Senate is doing to protect and strengthen our democracy? Ours is the longest surviving democracy in history. The American people are watching, the world is watching what we do. Americans expect us to vote, yes or no, not hide behind procedure. Restoring and updating the Voting Rights Act on a bipartisan basis is how we've always done it. The core provisions of the Voting Rights Act have been reauthorized 5 times. Every time it's been with overwhelming bipartisan support of Republicans and Democrats alike. Presidents Nixon, Reagan, George W. Bush all signed Voting Rights Act reauthorizations into law. They touted the profound importance of this landmark law for our democracy. In fact, I remember I was here, the most recent Voting Rights Act reauthorization was in 2006, and the vote, 98-0. We still have senators still serving today, both Republicans and Democrats, who voted to support that legislation. The compromise bill I've crafted with Senator Murkowski follows the very same blueprint of these other bipartisan efforts to restore the Voting Rights Act. I'm aware of the toxic partisanship of American politics today, but I hope that's not going to obscure what has for decades united us as Americans and across party lines. And that is the belief that every one of us should have that protecting our right to vote, the very right that gives our democracy its name, is bigger than party or politics. It's a belief that a system of self-government, a government of, by, and for the people, is one that's worth preserving for generations to come. It's a belief that government exists to serve the will of the people, not the other way around. So I hope that today we're going to rise above partisanship. Let's do what's right for our democracy. Let's not be afraid to vote. I hope we'll show Americans the Senate is still capable of being the conscience of the nation and a unifying force during a divided time. I still believe we can be the Senate that acts together to maintain Americans, our constituents' constitutional right to vote. When senators come to the floor to cast their votes today, I hope they keep in mind the rich bipartisan history of the Voting Rights Act. I hope they decide to live up to that history. And I hope they're also mindful of how history will remember us. Decades from now, when history tells the story of today's current threats to democracy, let it also tell the story of senators who rose above the fray to protect the right that gives democracy its very name. Let all senators vote so that all Americans can vote. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.